One of the hardest realizations I had during deconstruction was this. I accepted something as true before it was ever demonstrated as true. Not because I had evidence, not because I understood the mechanics, but because someone else was confident about it. Someone else's confidence literally became my certainty. And once I realized that, the entire structure collapsed. When I deconverted, I had to confront some very uncomfortable truths. I wasn't just wrong about religion, I had accepted an entire worldview based on anecdotal testimony, emotional experiences, and my own ignorance of how those experiences actually worked. I had mistaken not understanding something for evidence that something supernatural was happening. My deconversion wasn't just about losing faith, it was about realizing that I had been cheating at knowledge. I realized I had accepted a reality as true before it had ever been demonstrated as true. I let my ignorance of the mechanics be fueled by the volume of testimony. And that realization forced me to make a commitment. I will never again accept something as true simply because someone says it with confidence. Your confidence should never become my certainty without my comprehension. And here's the uncomfortable part. This isn't just a religion problem. This pattern shows up everywhere. Our politics, culture wars, social media, common knowledge. We constantly inherit beliefs we've never investigated. We repeat things we've never verified. We share ideas we've never tested. What we call common knowledge is often just borrowed certainty. We treat common knowledge as a safety net, but it's often just a consensus of people who also don't know how the thing works. Carl Sagan warned about this exact problem in The Demon Haunted World. He pointed out something that still haunts me to this day. We live in a society completely dependent on science and technology, yet almost nobody understands how any of it actually works. We know how to turn things on, but we don't know how things work. We are a society that knows how to turn the lights on, but has no idea how the grid functions. We have strong opinions about economies, and yet have never studied economics. And that gap creates a dangerous illusion. We think we know more than we actually do. This leads to something I call cognitive lethargy. People fall in love with ideas, but they never test them. They mistake having an idea for having a solution. You see it everywhere. Political theories, economic ideas, even cultural movements and social media debates. Everyone has a plan for the world, but very few people are actually experimenting with their ideas. It's easier to fall in love with the grand sweeping vision than it is to do the embarrassingly grunt work of a pilot program. Here's the reality. An idea is not a plan is not a solution, and a solution is not real until it survives experimentation. A real solution is something that has been tested, executed, refined, and proven to work. So personally, I've developed a filter. I don't want to hear your big ideas if you're not experimenting with them. I don't want to hear your solutions if you've never executed them. To me, this is the basis of modern superstition. Loving an idea simply because it's yours, not because it's proven. And when someone speaks with absolute certainty but has zero experimentation and zero execution, I know something immediately. They're still thinking like a believer. One of the biggest psychological impacts of religious domination is this: it trains people to pretend to know things that they haven't actually tried to know. Religion rewards confidence without demonstration. You're taught to say things like, I know God is real. I know this is true. Or even, I know this is the answer. But no one is adept at actually testing the claim. And that mindset doesn't disappear when people leave religion, it remains until we recognize it. If we don't rid ourselves of this residue, we end up pretending to help while avoiding the actual trying. This is actually one of the biggest dangers for people who leave religion. We can leave the beliefs, but keep the thinking style. We stop believing in miracles, but we start believing in ideologies. We stop believing in prophecy, but we start believing in theories. It's different content, but it's the same mental habit. Real understanding doesn't happen in the idea phase. It happens in the lab. It happens when you test the ideas, run the experiments, observe the outcomes, and then refine your thinking. Trying to help the world doesn't happen by having ideas about it. Trying doesn't happen in a manifesto or a tweet thread. It happens in the lab. It happens in the execution. Trying happens when you build something and see if it works. We need to stop valuing the feeling of being right and start valuing the demonstration of being right so that we can do well. That's the utility of being right, actually being able to decrease harm and increase well being. Don't tell me what you think, show me what you've built. Now, listen, there's a deeper cost to this than just being wrong about a few beliefs. When we pretend to know things we haven't actually tried to understand, it changes how our minds work. And over time, it reshapes how an entire society thinks. The first thing that happens when we live on borrowed certainty is that curiosity dies. Curiosity only exists when you admit that you don't know something. But when people are trained to say, I already know the answer, the investigation stops before it even begins. Instead of asking, how does this work? Why is this happening? What evidence supports this? We simply repeat what we've been told. And when that happens, the mind stops behaving like an explorer and starts behaving like a storage unit. It stops discovering and it just repeats. When you accept a big idea without understanding its mechanics, your brain stops asking how and starts asking who. You lose the ability to interpret the world through first principles. Instead of looking at a problem and breaking it down, you look for a signal that matches your borrowed certainty. Pretending to know requires a constant subconscious effort to ignore contradictions, and this creates cognitive friction, a low grade anxiety that comes from defending a house of cards you didn't even build. Borrowed certainty is a debt your mind eventually has to pay in the form of confusion. You haven't actually learned the terrain, you've just memorized someone else's map, and that map is decades old. Borrowed certainty doesn't just stop curiosity, it damages our ability to interpret the world around us. When we think we already understand something, we stop paying attention to the evidence that contradicts it. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. Instead of learning from reality, we begin filtering reality. We notice the things that support our belief and ignore the things that challenge it. Over time, the world stops being something we observe and it becomes something we defend. Certainty without understanding actually makes people more fragile, not more confident. Because when your beliefs are built on borrowed certainty, you can't defend them. You can only repeat them. And when those beliefs are challenged, it doesn't feel like a disagreement to you. It feels like an attack. That's why conversations collapse so quickly. People aren't protecting ideas, they're protecting identities built on ideas they never examined. Real knowledge requires a feedback loop: hypothesis, experiment, result, and correction. Borrowed certainty is a closed loop. Because you didn't arrive at the conclusion through evidence, no amount of evidence can move you off of it. You become immune to reality. You stop being an observer of the world and start being a spokesperson for a script. Your ability to pivot or adapt to new information is paralyzed because knowing has become a part of your identity rather than a functional tool. Now let's scale this up to society. If enough people pretend to know things they don't actually understand, we lose something incredibly important: our ability to solve problems together. Because solving real problems requires experimentation, evidence, humility, and revision. But borrowed certainty resists all of those. Instead of asking what works, people argue over who's right. And that's how societies get stuck, because people are more committed to defending their ideas than testing their ideas. When an entire culture adopts this cognitive lethargy, we create a society of performative experts. We stop solving problems and start competing for who can articulate the idea most passionately. In politics and culture, we vote for the most confident person with the biggest idea, even if they've never stepped foot in the lab of execution. This makes us incredibly vulnerable to demagogues and grifters. If we don't value the mechanics of how things work, we can be sold a miracle that's actually just a disaster wrapped in confirmation bias. This might be the most dangerous consequence. Borrowed certainty allows people to feel like they're helping without actually helping. Ideas start to replace action. Talking replaces testing, and belief replaces results. People become emotionally invested in their solutions long before those solutions have been demonstrated to work, which means they stop asking the most important question of all: is this actually solving anything? When we live on borrowed certainty, we aren't just being lazy, we're compromising our ability to perceive reality. We think we're saving time by skipping the learning phase, but what we're actually doing is blinding ourselves. Think about it. If you don't know why something is true, you can't know when it stops being true. You become a passenger in your own mind, driven by the confidence of people who are just as lost as you are. This is the residue of religious domination. It rewards the confession of faith over the demonstration of fact. And when that spreads to our politics and our social solutions, we end up with a world full of people shouting about how to fix an engine when they've never even seen under the hood. We aren't trying to know, we're just trying to be right. This is why leaving religion wasn't just about leaving beliefs for me. It required changing how I approach knowledge altogether. Not, I believe this, but have I tried to understand this? Not, this sounds right, but has this been demonstrated? Because the real opposite of superstition isn't atheism. The real opposite of superstition is intellectual responsibility. And that responsibility starts with a simple principle. No matter how confident someone sounds, your certainty should never come from their confidence. It should come from your comprehension, your understanding. So if there's one thing deconstruction taught me, it's this: truth doesn't demand confidence, it survives experimentation. And if we want to build a better world beyond superstition, we have to stop pretending we know things and start actually trying to know them. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation today. If you're looking for a community where you don't have to perform certainty or pretend that you've arrived at conclusions that you simply haven't yet, Bridge City might be the place for you. Our community is filled with atheists, agnostics, and even people still on the fringes of varying belief systems. From Miami to Malaysia, we're creating space for people just like you to find connection without coercion and comfort without control. While I am unapologetically an atheist, Bridge City is not an atheist space. It is a people centric space. So, regardless of where you are on your journey, there is room for you to get connected and get involved. Our mission is simple: to help people connect better, build better, and live better. And we think reason is the way. So, head over to the global campus today and join the most forward thinking, people centric, and life affirming community on the planet. I'll see you over there. Until next time, keep rising.